You are listening to
The Actuarial Business Podcast.
with MJ, the fellow actuary.
Business, more than any other occupation, is a continual dealing with the future, is a continual calculation and instinctive exercise in foresight. Now, this is a quote from the DK business book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. And this kind of quote would also have made sense if I'd replaced business with actuarial science. So if we had said, actuarial science, more than any other occupation, is a continual dealing with the future. It is a continual calculation and instinctive exercise in foresight. A lot of you would have agreed because as actuaries, we do deal with the future. We are doing calculations. I mean, when we're at university, it feels like they are continuous. Yes, when we do leave varsity, the calculations, though still prevalent, do become a little bit less and less. But it's this whole idea that we had in the introductory video to this podcast lecture, I don't know what we call long form audio, where someone just talks to themselves. It's not exactly a podcast, hey, because I don't have a human guest. I do have ChatGPT open with me, in case I need to ask any questions, and that can kind of be my co-host. Maybe we can refer to this as a podcast. But in that introductory video, there was this idea that I put forward that my lecturer told us in our first year at Actuarial Science that actuaries are businessmen and businesswomen at the end of the day. And it's quite interesting because, as I said, many times we think, oh, actuaries, we're good at maths, we stick with just the calculations. But what this quote talks to and what actuaries do is like, well, why are we doing these calculations? You got your astrophysicists, they're doing also calculations in understanding the cosmos. You have engineers, they're also doing calculations to understand the infrastructure and whatever they're building. And actuaries, we do calculations for business. Now, yes, most of the time we get pulled into what you can call as the liability businesses, the insurance games, calculating mortality, morbidity, catastrophe, and we seem to have found a little bit of a space in that. But we're branching out more into banking, finance, investments, these type of things. But one of the actuarial subjects, specifically enterprise risk management, which I continue to teach for the Actuarial Society of South Africa, deals with using these calculations to a broader base of enterprises. In fact, we go beyond business even in the subject to governments, to charities, to all sorts of various institutions. And I think this is where it can maybe become quite useful to have a definition for business. How should we define this concept of a business? Is it an organization that seeks to make profit? Very capitalistic mindset. Is a business an organization with a shared purpose? But then, charities and other things can kind of fall into that definition. So why don't we start off? I mean, like I said, we've got ChatGPT open, so we can say, please provide a definition of business. Please provide a definition of business. Okay, it's giving a very long answer. It brought it down to 5 things. But it says, a business is an organized effort by individuals or groups to produce and sell goods or services for a profit. It operates within an economic system using resources like labor, capital, and technology to create value and meet the needs or wants of customers. Businesses can take various forms, such as sole proprietorships, partnerships, corporations, or cooperatives, and may focus on different objectives, including profit-making, social impact, or innovation. And it says the key characteristics of business include being goal-orientated, so typically aims to generate profit or achieve specific objectives, Economic activity involves the production, distribution, and exchange of goods or services. Customer focus, striving to meet the needs and preference of its target market. This is an interesting one. Risk and uncertainty, operating in environments that involve financial, operational, and market risks. It's interesting because from an actuarial point of view, we kind of have, we have market risk, credit risk, and operational risk. So interesting that they have it as financial, operational, market. Sorry, a little side note there. And organizational structure has a defined structure and processes to carry out its operations efficiently. I guess there's another way of, because there was a lot of words ChatGPT spitting out for us, but you could almost think of business as a legal entity with a purpose that's been outlined. If your business doesn't have a purpose, it's like, okay, is it doing anything? What is it here for? And sometimes the purpose doesn't have to be a meaningful purpose. Sometimes the purpose of some businesses is to act as a shell company to avoid tax in another jurisdiction. But that would still be a legal entity. So it's almost like businesses are formed or are part of the whole legal system, where I see ChatGPT was talking more about business being part of the economic system. And I think one of the big human inventions or the big innovations that happened was when we were able to separate liability from the individual and transfer it to the business. That's why you even have, sometimes businesses are referred to as limited liabilities. And it's this idea that in the past, if I wanted to start up a business, if I was to take a loan and I was to do something and the business failed, then I would lose my house, I would lose my dog, I would lose my own personal assets to meet the shortfall, of whatever liability I have incurred by taking on various creditors. And the creditors could have been people who've lent money to us or customers who've paid us for goods and services that we have not yet rendered. You can kind of get that in a little bit different forms. But when we came up with this idea of the limited liability, what we could then do is we could protect the personal assets. So we could set up a business that was a legal entity in its own right, and if the business failed, the business assets would be taken and the personal liability would have been, like I say, protected. Now, what that also therefore allowed was for the rise of shareholders. But before we get into shareholders, because I think they're the most fascinating stakeholder of a business, more than the business owner themselves. Well, when I say business owner, the business manager, the person who runs the business, important player. But I think the shareholders are more fascinating. Of course, in many businesses, the business owner is the primary and sometimes only shareholder. But let's ask ChatGPT, when did limited liability emerge? And hit that out. And the crazy thing is that this limited liability emerged during the early 19th century, during the whole industrialization. And that it's a fascinating thing because I think business only really, this is something that we especially if you're studying actuarial science, like it's something that you're dealing with on a daily basis. How many times do we see advertisements or, everyone we kind of know, not everyone, but most people we know work in businesses. There's businesses all around us. There's logos on all the various appliances in our homes. Yet this concept of, limited liability, these businesses that we all interact with, on a daily basis, only really emerged during the early 19th century. If you want to take a little bit of history, you can go back to, and I must be careful because you guys know me. I'm a little bit of a history nerd, and I can get stuck in, and I don't want this to be like a business history lecture, but so we'll maybe just very quickly skim over or touch on this. The Dutch East India Company, which is a company that very much shaped the country that I'm in, South Africa. So if it wasn't for the Dutch East India Company, I might have been born, I don't know, maybe somewhere else in this world, which would have been unfortunate because South Africa is the best country there is. But they're often cited as the first corporation to issue shares and limit investors' liability to the amount that's invested. So it was this whole idea of, hey, give us some money so we can pursue some activity. In this case with the Dutch East India Company, it was like, wow, there's some huge profitable trade if we take our goods in Europe and we trade them with people in Asia. And if we go via the waterways, we're going to be a lot quicker than if we go by land. Also, there were less pirates than bandits back in the day. So it's also a lot, safer from not losing all your commercial goods. And it'll be easier to transport large volumes via ships than over land. So the thing is that these boats were pretty expensive. These ships were huge investments. And having limited liability meant that the investor could just provide capital. And if anything went wrong, it wasn't like they were going to knock on the door and say, hey, we actually need to take more money from you because the ship sank and you're obligated to give us more money to build the next one or whatever the situation might have been. The investors were like very much, hey, you put this amount in and that's it. And I mean, look, this then went on to form a little bit of the stock market. And the stock market, especially in those early days, it's fascinating because we're told that story of the tulips where, the stock market, which was created for business enterprises, for people to trade shares on, an actual activity of, like I say, transporting goods between Asia and Europe. Suddenly, there's tulips. People are trading tulips. One of the misnomers that they were trading the actual flowers. It would be more like the bulb because the bulbs were easier to store. Where, I mean, for any of you who've gotten flowers on Valentine's Day, know that those flowers don't last, for the rest of the year. They kind of die out. So with these tulips, it was very much the bulbs that they were trading, and the bulbs, tulips. You don't just get one type of tulip. You can get, I think there's like the Midnight Queen is one of the most valuable ones, a very dark one. Then you could get cracked tulips. And the reason why I expand a little bit on this is because it's important for us to realize that humanity tends to use things first as a toy before we use them as a tool, especially when it comes to a new technology. So the new technology of the stock market comes out and we've got people treating it as a toy, trading tulips and having a lot of fun, with this kind of mechanism. And of course, this tulip bubble burst, people were putting more money until someone was like, hey, hold on. At the end of the day, these are just flower bulbs. Like, what are we doing? But it was a really cool way back then to kind of flex, show off your wealth, and you can imagine, come over for a dinner party, see my cool tulips. And I think what was so important, like we kind of look back at this whole tulip history and people are like, oh, this just shows how irrational humans are, like how silly people are, how capitalism will always crumble because we came up with this innovation of the stock market and we ended up using it to trade, flowers. But I kind of see it as this is the best way to learn. As a species, as a society, the best way to learn is to have fun. And it's to, before using something as a tool, is to use it as a toy. And why this resonates a lot with me is because the business I'm going to be forming is around NFTs. And this is a fairly new technology. I mean, gosh, we're going into its 8th year. Kind of came out during 2017 with Crypto Kittens. And I still feel like we're in the toy phase. NFTs, blockchain even, the fact that meme tokens are dominating the market caps. Dogecoin is so big. There's Dog with Hat. There's Pepe. There's all these silly things going out there. It's because I think humanity is still using the technology of the blockchain as a toy. We're still in that fun, like, what is this? What are the capabilities? And in time, we'll turn it into a proper tool. So people who come and say, hey, NFT technology, let's build title deeds on it. Let's use it to really transfer real world assets and do all these kind of serious things. It's like, yes, this is a very cool idea. Governments are looking at it. I think Honduras was one of the closest to implement something with the blockchain and around title deeds. And you can imagine how amazing the world will be if you can sit on your computer and purchase beachfront on various Caribbean islands and then trade them. I mean, we would see a huge boom in property prices because this technology would remove so much of the friction needed when it comes to trading property, escrows and legal firms needed, and the whole title deed office system can be updated, and property will go through the roof. But we're not there just yet. The technology is still in its infancy, and so as a tool, it's still clumsy. You think you're more likely to hurt yourself with a tool than you are to hurt yourself with a toy. With a tool, property, real world assets of significant amounts, if there's any mistakes, that's going to be incredibly costly. Where if you have your technology as a toy, and yes, you make some mistakes, it'll be costly, but not entirely devastating. And we even saw that with the crypto kittens. One of the not mistakes, but results that happened is that it clogged up the Ethereum network. And it was like, oh, wow, how should this chain react when there's huge amounts of volume? And of course, the Ethereum blockchain has evolved since then. And not only has Ethereum at the core level improved, but there's all these things called layers 2s, Ethereum virtual machines. Without getting too much into a crypto kind of podcast, we are seeing the technology evolve and adapt to address the issues and faults that were made while this thing was still being used as a toy. And so with the business that I'm making, it's still going to be at that toy level. We're going to be using NFT technology to trade Pokemon cards. And the ultimate idea, it should be, this is fun. You do this because it takes away a little bit of boredom. It's a little bit of nostalgia around Pokemon. And because it's being done virtually, it will remove a lot of the friction that prevents people from, say, maybe trading who would have wanted to. Because to try to trade physical Pokemon cards with strangers over the internet, there's a lot of risks and uncertainty involved with that whole activity. Making something virtual, you can remove a lot of that friction. And we're going to be doing that in these podcasts. Is we're going to be talking a little bit about this business that I'm setting up for this year. I've been fortunate enough to be given a grant by one of the blockchains to build it. So we've got the funding. I now need to deploy the funding. And as someone who's always been fascinated with business theory, it's time to kind of put it into action. I mean, I've had businesses in the past, some successful, some not so successful, but very much at a small scale. The more successful one maybe being the Udemy online courses that I have that kind of graduated from the YouTube channel, which is now, it's crazy. I have more listeners or subscribers or students, I don't know what you want to call them, on Udemy. Like that number has surpassed my YouTube. And just as well, because on the Udemy, especially I'm in business Udemy, so a lot of businesses pay me for their employees to watch my content, specifically on credit models. That seems to be one of the more popular ones. So that's been a business that has been successful. It runs very passively, and I'm very grateful for it. I have tried to create apps in the past. I've tried to create some NFT projects in the past. My NFTs on Super Red have done very, very well. Sold out currently, so it's a new year. Should maybe make some more art and put it up there. But I had an idea to have chess brilliant moves as NFTs, and kind of was setting that thing up, and it didn't really go according to plan. I wanted to do NFTs with Instagram influencers. That kind of didn't go according to plan. There's been treasure hunts, there's been various little game ideas, and been learning quite a bit around those ideas. And of course, maybe we make this Pokemon thing a success, we can come back to some of those old ideas. And then before NFTs emerged, I had some big business failures. One was around, I don't know if you guys ever saw that video I made I called it Hypecoin. It was essentially turning social media likes into a currency. So you could like a celebrity multiple times, and then you would have your portfolio of your likes. So you wouldn't just be like, oh yeah, I like Taylor Swift. You're like, I 100 like Taylor Swift. Quantify that. And then Taylor Swift could look at her leaderboard of fans, and she can be like, wow, who's this guy Michael who's liked me 100 times? He's my number one fan. Let me invite him backstage to my next concert. And so the idea would be that the celebrities would be ranked against each other with not who had the most followers, but who had the most likes, knowing that followers could add to the fanaticism and really boost them up. And also the fans amongst themselves would be competing per celebrity. So it was a little bit multi-dimensional, which looking back was probably a little bit too complex of an idea. Built that entire social media app myself using Ionic and watching some videos on mobile app development. But I didn't hide the APK files, so someone was able to get into the Firebase account and just give themselves a stupid amount of this currency. Because you had to solve like maths questions. You can see it was very nerdy. You had to solve maths questions in order to get more of these tokens. And back then I was like, oh, I don't need the blockchain. This is 2016. I learned about blockchain in 2014, and I was like, oh, it's so expensive to do transactions. Whereas I guess today that idea would make a lot more sense on the blockchain now that transaction fees have been reduced, and we're kind of getting more, as a society, familiar with this idea of tokens. In fact, there's been quite a few other business ideas around tokenizing and celebrities and influencers. Like I said, we tried to do something with Instagram. Did it with 3 models. It was actually doing really, really well. And then I got hired by Polygon, and they were actually doing something with Instagram, itself. Like, I think one of Mark Zuckerberg's advisor, though the guy told him to change the name to Meta. I don't know how true this story is, but if he actually gave Mark the name, he would then join Polygon as one of our advisors or something like that. And so we were working quite closely with Zuckerberg's team around Instagram for NFTs. I unfortunately wasn't, I was a little bit, joined the company a little bit too late. It was a little bit of the C-suites that were doing it. So I kind of just got to see it from a distance, and unfortunately it didn't work. It never really got rolled out into South Africa, so I didn't even get to see it too much in action. But I digress. The whole thing I wanted to chat about or make this point is that, yes, when it comes to new technology, before we use it as a tool, we use it as a toy. And that's what we're seeing currently with crypto. But we're 8 years into NFTs, so that transition from toy to tool is probably around the corner. It probably is around the corner. So, yes, anyway, what we were asking ChatGPT. It was in the United Kingdom. The pivotal moment came with the enactment of the Limited Liability Act of 1855, which explicitly allowed investors in certain companies to limit their liability to their investment. This made it safe for individuals to invest in large, risky enterprises like railroads or factories. So, although it says here in the United States, the concept developed concurrently, with laws passed at the state level. So New York led the way in 1811, okay, so that's a little bit earlier, passing legislation that allowed manufacturing companies to limit shareholder liability. And this ties in very nicely with actuarial science, because one of the things actuaries, we're doing all these calculations. Like, why are you doing these calculations? Because we're calculating liability. We're calculating what is our obligation to other people. I remember when I was teaching finance, I would always say to my students, give me a definition for finance, and I could always show that they were all wrong, because I had small classes for this is at the not the fellowship level, the one just below fellowship, the specialist level. I could show that they were all wrong, because out of the 10 of you, we had small classes. Each of you gave a very different answer. One would talk about, corporate finance and public finance and private finance. Then somebody else would talk about wealth creation. Someone would mention, capitalism. And I was like, yes, you're giving me a lot of associations with finance, but you're not answering specifically the question, what is finance? And I said, if we look at the etymology of the word, especially the fin, which is French for end, it's where we get finish line, finale. I mean, even Finland, the end of Europe, that country. But fin, I guess also it's the end of a fish. Fishes have fins. But fin means end, and finance is all about being an end of an obligation. And a liability and obligation are also, very closely associated words. So we tend to think of finance, we think of wealth and assets and those things, whereas, any good accountant will tell you, hey, it's a balance sheet because, you've got your assets, but you also have your liabilities. And in fact, the whole actuarial approach to investing is something called asset liability matching. So you will invest in specific assets that have very similar characteristics to your liabilities. So, because if, let's say, your liabilities are very sensitive to interest rates, which is what they will be if they're, very much in the future. So long-term liabilities very much impacted by interest rates. So you then want to invest in assets that have got that same exposure to interest rate, the same degree and in the same direction, so that if anything happens to the interest rates, your assets move accordingly with it, and you can still meet your obligations when they fall due. So you don't just want to say, oh, I've got this liability, let me now invest in Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin's going to go up. It's like, well, is Bitcoin influenced by the same factors that is influencing your liabilities? And if the answer is, well, no, then, okay, that's not probably the best asset liability matching strategy. And then, of course, if you have a surplus, if your assets exceed your liabilities, yes, go and do whatever the hell you want with your surplus. But until you have that surplus, your assets should match your liabilities. That is the actuarial philosophy to investing. And I think this is also what makes business as a subject very, very interesting, because you got to talk about business within economics. You got to talk about business within investing and finance. You got to talk about business with regards to the legal system, limited liability and the state passing, rules and laws. And it's not something that exists by itself. You got to understand these broader topics, but you also need to understand a little bit of human psychology, maybe even sociology at a societal level, because, hey, if you can understand behaviors of your customers, then you're going to be best able to address their needs and their wants. So what I like about business is the fact that it is so grand, it is so big, it is so much all over the place. Whereas, sometimes when you have business as a syllabus, like I say, in the actuarial curriculum, it can be a little bit dry because they kind of like have cut and dissected, chunks of it out, and on their own, it's like, oh, why do I have to learn about, accounting? Like, oh. But when you realize, no, we need accounting so that we can have transparency to the shareholders. These are people who are giving us their money and just trusting us to run and do these businesses. So we need some sort of mechanism to maintain that kind of transparency. And what happens if those shareholders are, not just private shareholders, but the public, and it's traded on the stock market? Then those accounting needs to meet certain criteria so that they standardized to make it easier to bring more money in. And we need that more money because then we can do better business things. And once you see how it fits into everything, it's like, oh, okay, accounting important. But if you just dissect and you learn accounting on its own, it's you've got a recipe to cure insomnia. So it's just, one of these things where I think this is what makes business so fascinating, is this idea that it has all these strong associations with all of these other subjects. We've literally, we've got the DK Publishing book open. We've read one thing from it. This is the introduction. And like I said, we read that quote about business, more than any other occupation, is a continual dealing with the future. And this continual calculation and instinctive exercise in foresight. And they've also got this idea of continual change. And, in business, we call it pivots. And it resonates a little bit with me because, even the way I'm presenting this information has pivoted. So I first kind of filmed them as videos, me with my face, hair that needs to be cut, the beard that needs to be shaved in the Pokémon room with all the cards behind me. But I found that when you're filming yourself, you kind of a little bit more conscious, and you're also more mindful of time. Because if you're making a content that's visual, you're expecting people to watch it. Whereas I know I can consume a lot more of a content if it's purely audio while I'm driving around or doing something else. and have this voice kind of in the background. So even the way I'm presenting this information, there's been a pivot. Even my Pokemon NFT business has pivoted in the sense that I kind of started out I wanted to be a grading company. So I enjoyed my Pokemon cards, and I wanted to put my Pokemon cards in, we call it slabs, to get them authenticated. And it's this crazy form of alchemy, if you think about it. Alchemists had this crazy notion that you could turn lead into gold. And I think they had the wrong ingredient when they looked at lead, because it turns out if you put cardboard into plastic, that's how you get the big money. You take a Pokemon card, you put it in a professionally graded chunk of plastic, this temper resistant stuff, and suddenly the value shoots through the roof. Especially if you get like a pristine 10 and you get the authenticator says, no, this card is in gem mint condition. I love how they use so much jewelry metaphor, and you look at Pokemon cards, they'll say like sparkle, they even add a bit of a metallic layer to them just to give them that shine. And it's fascinating, this association with jewelry. And I remember a friend who was in NFTs with me and was wanting to make an album around NFTs. He was going to call the album JPEG Jewelry. And it's just interesting how we associate, these things with that. And I guess it's a way to try and drive value up. If you're framed to say, oh, this is jewelry, instantly in your mind you're thinking expensive. Because that's the whole idea behind jewelry. It's like, oh, look, whichever person you're buying the jewelry for, or even if you're buying it for yourself, it's seen as this massive treat. You're paying this massively inflated price for a little, little rock, a little bit of metal, and you're paying this huge amount this huge amount of money for it. And it sparkles, which is cool, but its utility is somewhat limited. But it's this idea that, hey, it's expensive, it's grand, it's romantic, it's a gesture, it's a flex, it's there's so much associated with it. So it's interesting to see how Pokemon cards and other collectibles try get in on that type of association. And we'll see that when it comes to business, particularly marketing, and marketing is a fascinating subject on its own, and also one that kind of feel, in order to really appreciate, needs to be tied in with everything else. I think there's even a quote in the DK book that says, "Marketing is too important to be left to the marketers." And it's this idea that, how are you positioning your brand? What are the associations that you want, that you explicitly want? What are some of the associations you don't really want to bring on, but unfortunately are? So maybe some negative associations around with Pokemon could be like, oh, it's for nerds, or oh, it's only for children. These are maybe negative associations, where positive associations would be this, well, hey, this is this intellectual property that has a global reach, and what other brand can boast about a collective fantasy that spreads across the world. That's why I kind of get excited around Pokemon. But yes, what were we? I must also admit, I'm recording this on the 1st of January. So yeah, we had a good New Year's Eve. Went to bed at 3 a.m. a little bit late. So, and haven't even finished my morning coffee. I was going to have the coffee while we made this podcast. So, this is maybe a good time to say that, future podcasts, I should be a lot more awake, should be a lot more alert. So let's maybe wrap this one up and chat about what we want to actually cover in these podcasts. So for me personally, as someone who's going into business, we've got this grant from one of the blockchains. It's like, okay, it's happening. We've got a little pitch to the investors, or what would you call it, a little bit of a meeting, a catch up on the 15th of January. These dates are rolling in, stuff is happening, milestones have to be reached, have to get some contractors, get people to assist with various parts of the business. So stuff is moving, and I thought this would be a good time to also, for myself personally, just to brush up on my business theory. And I've always found the best way to learn is by having fun, and I do have fun by teaching. So I kind of feel like if I can explain something to somebody else, it means I myself understand. And if I can't, then it's a very good indicator that I myself don't understand it. So a little bit of this, you can think of this podcast as me talking to myself. And so at the end of the day, if it doesn't get too many listeners, it's not the end of the world. The primary purpose, I guess, is for myself to just embed myself back with the business knowledge, almost as a nice refresher course. But on the other hand, a journey shared is a journey halved. I don't know if that's a cliche, if I just where that comes from, but it's the idea of, hey guys, join along, listen. If you're also starting a business, let us know in the comment section. We can share some ideas, we can share some hurdles. It was quite cool at for New Year's. I was chatting to a guy who's just started a business in Stellenbosch, doing deliveries for alcohol and all of that. So I was like, this is really cool. We should catch up sometime and just share our ideas. And I think one of the things I also want to do is form maybe more community around business, around the Pokémon business that I'm kind of creating. So building up a little bit of a Discord, a little bit of a wait list, so that when the business is ready to launch, everyone can be like, hey, let's give this idea a go. Let's see, did Michael make something cool, or did he make something that we're never going to go check out again? And Josh, so I want to try almost do this on a weekly basis. Try on a weekly basis, go through this DK book, Big Ideas Simply Explained, and to read some of the contents page. So some of the stuff that's coming up, and if we go all the way to the beginning, is if you can dream it, you can do it. That's beating the odds at startup. Then there's a gap in the market, but is there a market in the gap? Finding a profitable niche. You can learn all you need to know about the competition's operations by looking in his garbage cans. That's around studying the competition. The secrets of business is to know something that nobody else knows, standing out in the market. Be first or be better, gaining an edge, putting all your eggs in one basket and then watching that basket. And that's under managing risk, which is, there's a famous saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and diversification. We're going to learn that, sometimes diversification is not the best thing to do. Luck is a dividend of sweat. The more you sweat, the luckier you get. Broaden your vision and maintain stability while advancing forward. Nothing great is created suddenly. The role of the CEO is to enable people to excel. Chains of habits are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. A corporation is a living organism. It has to continue to shed its skin. Without the continuous growth and progress, success has no meaning. If you believe in something, working nights and weekends, it says work nights and weekends, it won't feel like work. The Weightless Startup. And that is part one, which is start small, think big. Then there's going to be, there's around 10, 15 chapters on lighting the fire. So leadership in human resources, or making money work when it comes to managing finances, working with a vision, strategy and operations, successfully selling, marketing management, delivering the goods, production and post-production. And those are things. So all in total, it's a 351 page book with some diagrams and some fun things for us to go through. How many lectures are there going to be? I don't know. We're just going to keep doing this, and I guess until the business fails and I do something else, or maybe the business keeps growing and we just continue this journey. Maybe we reach the end of the book and we just keep going with it. I'm sure ChatGPT wouldn't mind helping us develop more questions and content to go through. But thank you so much for listening to episode 1. What should we call this? The Actuarial Business Podcast. I don't know. If you can think of a better name, let me know in the comment section below. We can always change these things. And let's wrap it up. And as always, I hope everyone's having a good 2025. Cheers.
Listening to the Actuarial Business Podcast with MJ, the fellow actuary. MJ, the fellow actuary.